Good afternoon and welcome to PAVE Europe's 24th virtual panel on Navigating the Road Ahead, Switzerland's Push for Autonomous Mobility. My name is Nicola Hare, Project and Engagement Manager at the Partners for Automated Vehicle Education Europe. For those who are joining us for the first time, we are a broad coalition of organizations with a goal of bringing the conversation about automated vehicle technology to the public so that everyone can play an active role in shaping the future of mobility. AVs have had quite the start to 2025, and Switzerland in particular has seen a significant amount of news on new projects, partnerships, regulation, and more. Today's conversation will be moderated by Martin Neubayer from the Swiss Association for Autonomous Mobility and member of PAVE Europe's board. What will change in March on Swiss roads? Will expectations differ from reality? What does Switzerland's AV landscape look like today? And what will it look like in a few years' time? These are just the questions that I have, and I'm sure that our panelists are very eager to answer a lot of the questions that you have. So I do encourage you to use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen to send your questions, and we'll get through them toward the end of the discussion. So without further ado, Martin, I'll hand it over to you to guide the rest of the conversation.
Thank you so much, Nicola. I really appreciate you to be here today to represent Sam, but of course also PAVE. So for your information, for us here in Switzerland, we are currently honestly at a key moment in the development of mobility. A moment that is not just about technological innovation, but also, of course, about major regulatory changes, clearly that will also influence our society, but also economy. So why is this topic of importance for us in Switzerland? We are a small country, but highly innovative. We have a diverse landscape, dense population, strong public transport, but all these, of course, pose challenges for new mobility solutions. And clearly, autonomous driving offers opportunities for safety, efficiency, and of course, accessibility, but also raises questions when it comes to regulation, public acceptance, but also implementation. And that will be clearly one of the topics for our panel talk today. So it's definitely about exploring the future of autonomous vehicles and mobility in Switzerland. But let me have first a look a little bit back what happened within the last few years here in Switzerland. We have been actually the first country worldwide using autonomous vehicles on public roads. We bought them in 2015, 2016. Most of you guys, I guess, actually know it has been the manufacturers from France, Navia and EasyMile, who more or less started that. So we used these vehicles on public roads in 2016 in a small city called Sion, mainly due to the fact that it has most of the sunny days during the year. And of course, we tried to prove that autonomous mobility wasn't just a vision, but something that become clearly reality. And from that moment on, lots of other public transport operators, such as Geneva and TPG, who's joining today, with Gero and Beukers, also tried to push that topic from early days on, and try to see how to further develop, of course, also the use case. And as I said, we had lots of pilot projects in that regard. Nevertheless, if you want to move forward from these little projects or little pilots to widespread deployment, that's clearly where you need legal frameworks. And that is also exactly where the new regulation on autonomous driving comes in. Ideas to provide a legal framework to safely but also effectively integrate autonomous vehicles into our current transport system, but also into the current logistics system. We focus, of course, a lot lately on transporting people, but we shouldn't forget about logistics as well. Also, in that regard, we have a few projects up and running here in Switzerland. To give us an overview of the key points and what they also, of course, also mean for us here in Switzerland, I'm pleased to have a wonderful panelists here today, but of course also Lorenz Stalder from the Federal Office of Roads on board today, who will introduce the main aspects of the new regulation in a short presentation. But moving on and deep diving into this presentation from Lorenz, I'm pleasing all the panelists to quickly introduce themselves and give a few key points about you. And perhaps already mentioned, Lorenz, if okay with you, you can directly start saying a few words about yourself.
Thank you. I would also like to welcome you from my side. My name is Lorenz Stalder. I have been working as a lawyer for almost 3 years at the Swiss Federal Road Office. The Federal Road Office is part of the Swiss Federal Administration and is primarily responsible for the maintenance of Swiss motorways, but in addition, it's also responsible for legislation in the field of road traffic, in particular traffic rules and vehicle registration. I personally work in the area of the traffic rules and road signs, and in the last 3 years, I have mainly been involved in legislation on automated driving.
Wonderful, Lawrence. Thank you so much. Who's next on the list? Perhaps you go ahead, Christian.
Yes, hello. Nice to see you all. Christian, Chief Business Development Officer at Holo, a autonomous technology deployment and implementation partner from originally Denmark. We've been around since 2016, several generations of technologies, implementation, and now we have our lighthouse project in Oslo, where we operate a fleet of neo vehicles in public transport with an open service for passengers.
Thank you so much, Christian. Next on the list, please, Jero and Boykes from TPG.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you also, Martin. Jeroen Beukers. I work at TPG, which is the public transport operator in the canton of Geneva in Switzerland. I, with my team, develop and manage automated mobility projects since 2017. First with one vehicle and then later on with several minibuses, always for public transport. So we had areas where we could drive with up to 4 minibuses in the same time, dynamically routed, on demand, door-to-door, virtual bus stops included, and connected to the TPG normal bus and tram network. We are involved in European projects. The 2 main projects, which most people probably know, is the Avenue project, and today it's the Ultimo project. Within the framework of the Ultimo project, the idea is to have a larger fleet of vehicles, up to 15 or even more minibuses, which are driving around in the canton of Geneva. That's it from my side. Thank you.
Great, Darren. Thank you so much. And last but not least, please, Mr. Jon Gessner from WeRide.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Jon Gessner. In WeRide, I'm responsible for the European business. WeRide has been founded 2017 in Silicon Valley and headquartered in Guangzhou and China. So it's focused on L4 technology. So the product portfolio ranged from robotaxi, robobus, robot sweepers, robovan, and also the high level ADAS, so L3, L4, autonomous driving technology to the passenger cars. From the geographically is with a very strong global footprint. We have already successfully deployed fleet, so L4 fleet in Singapore, Japan, Abu Dhabi, in the US as well, of course, also in China, several cities. And now we are about to launching also product in Switzerland. So I'm happy to be here and to discuss and to exchange. So our planning strategy and also point of views.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, these are our panelists today. I think a wonderful mixture of different people. Coming then to the next point, the presentation from Lawrence. Lawrence, the stage is yours. Have fun, okay?
Thank you. During the next, I would like to express first my sincere thanks for this opportunity to present Swiss legislation on automated driving today. During the next 10 minutes, I would like to give a short overview of the new legal situation regarding automated driving in Switzerland. It's not about the pilots, that Martin has already mentioned. It's about regular use of the automation systems. I won't be able to go too much into details. However, I will try to address some of the topics of today's panel. What difficulties did we face in drafting the new ordinance? How did we take into account public acceptance of automated driving? I hope this way I can provide already some input for the following discussions. I will start by outlining the concept of the new legislation. The legislation on automated driving consists of two laws, the pre-existing Road Traffic Act and the new ordinance on automated driving. The Road Traffic Act was amended by Parliament in 2023 and forms the legal basis for the ordinance. However, the law only regulates automated driving in general terms and leaves it to the Federal Council, the Swiss government, to regulate the details. The law is mainly limited to naming the use cases that the Federal Council is allowed to regulate. The key provisions for automated driving can therefore be found in the Ordinance on Automated Driving. This will now come into force on March 1st, that is next Saturday. It regulates the approval and the legal use of automation systems in details. If you are interested in the law and the ordinance, they can be found on the website listed in the slide and under the numbers given there. Why have we regulated mainly at the lower level of the ordinance? Because an ordinance can be adapted directly by the Federal Council and thus much faster than a law. This is necessary because automated driving is a very new phenomenon for legislation and because there is a lack of experience. For many provisions, we had no precedent because there has never been anything comparable to regulate. Therefore, we ultimately do not know how well the new ordinance will work. Further, we do not know in which direction the technology and international standards will develop. We therefore want to be able to adapt the legal basis quickly if necessary. We already expect to revise the ordinance for the first time within the next 5 years and the Road Traffic Act around 2030, when we can take into account our first experiences and feedback we have received. A central part of the regulation is the approval of the automation systems. This is essentially regulated in the same way for all use cases, which is why I'm not going to differentiate here. To be approved, the systems must be in particular meet the technical requirements. These are essentially derived from the well-known international technical regulations, specifically UNECE regulations numbers 155 to 157. However, EU regulations are particularly important for Switzerland. Vehicles that are to be registered in Switzerland must also meet the technical requirements of the EU. Whether the technical requirements are met is essentially determined by the type approval. In Switzerland, all vehicle components must be type approved. This will also apply to automation systems. These must generally have an EU type approval. Accordingly, the provisions of the EU regulations are also of great importance for Switzerland. In preparation of the regulation, we have oriented ourselves in large part to the implementing regulation 2022-1426, particularly with regard to the driverless vehicles. However, the ordinance includes a provisions for exceptions, which allows individual provisions such as a type approval requirement to be disregarded in individual cases. This will be checked and decided by the Federal Roads Office. The aim of this provision is, for example, to make it easier to register test vehicles after a pilot test has been successfully completed. This exception clause is a good example of a provision that breaks new ground. There has been no comparable regulation to date in Swiss law. It remains to be seen whether the exception clause will actually be an advantage for companies that wish to register such vehicles. I will now turn the question of which use of the automation system will be allowed. The ordinance regulates 3 use cases: vehicle with takeover request, automated parking systems, and driverless vehicles. I will discuss the vehicles with takeover requests and driverless vehicles, but I will omit the use case of the automating park. The vehicles with takeover requests correspond to the known automated lane keeping system. These are those automation systems that can temporarily take over the driving task completely. However, a driver must be present who can take over the driving task again. The main question here is what non-driving related activities the driver may perform while the system is activated and how they must respond to a request to take back the control. When the system is activated, the regulation releases the driver from the obligation to control the vehicle. This means that the driver no longer has to keep their hands on the steering wheel or monitor traffic as they have to today in Swiss traffic law. However, they must remain ready to resume control of the vehicle at any time. The regulation does not specify which non-driving related activities the driver may perform. Since the driver must be able to take over the driving task at any time, the range of permissible activities is probably rather small. The driverless vehicles no longer require a driver. However, they must be monitored by remote operators and may only be driven on sections of road for which the keeper of the driverless vehicle has received approval from the canton, that's a member state of the Swiss Confederacy. With regard to operators, the ordinance only defines their minimum tasks and obligations. It should be noted that the range of tasks essentially results from the use intended by the manufacturer of the automation system. The keeper of the driverless vehicles plays a major role. In Swiss road traffic law, the keeper is the person who has insured a vehicle and had it registered. This is usually the same person as the owner, but it does not have to be. The keeper of the driverless vehicles must obtain approval from the competent cantonal authority for the sections of the road to be used by its driverless vehicle. The driverless vehicle can't be registered for use on the road without this approval. The competent cantonal authority checks whether the driverless vehicle can operate safely on the applied for roads. Article 45, paragraph 1 of the ordinance defines the relevant criteria. Provided the keeper proves that these criteria are met, the requested routes are to be approved in principle. Of course, it's rather a simplification, but it's the general idea of this provision. Checking these criteria will be a relatively major challenge for the cantons. We are therefore currently in the process of drafting additional instructions for the cantons in which we explain and describe how to check these criteria. However, the ordinance provides in Article 45, paragraph 2, that the cantons may also refuse the approval for other reasons. These are primarily issues of traffic flow and traffic planning of the canton. This right of the cantons was added because they expressed concerns during the consultation process and felt that they needed more discretion. One disadvantage of this regulation is, of course, that it creates a certain amount of uncertainty and more work for the keepers. Ultimately, however, this provision is also intended to increase public acceptance of automated driving. I would like to briefly discuss another important role of the keeper. The automation system of driverless vehicles can take over the task of driving, but the driver has also other duties in addition to the task of driving. For example, in the Swiss law, they must check the loading of the vehicle before they drive. Since the driverless vehicle no longer requires a human presence, we had to regulate how this task should be organized. Our solution is that it is the responsibility of the keepers of driverless vehicles to ensure in organizational terms that the obligations previously addressed to the driver continue to be met. In most cases, the keeper is free to decide how to organize this. Only a few obligations are set out in the ordinance. For example, that the keeper must ensure that the driverless vehicle is checked before it is put into daily operation. Before I'm coming to the end of my presentation, I would also like to discuss shortly civil liability, because In public debate, the fear is often expressed that the question of civil liability remains unresolved in the case of automated driving, since no human is responsible for the driving test. I would therefore like to briefly explain why such questions of liability are already unproblematic under the current law. The keeper of the vehicle can only register it if it is insured. In the event of an accident, the keeper's liability insurance is therefore generally liable, regardless of whether a person was riding in the vehicle. This will not change for vehicles with automation systems. The insured parties have a direct right of claim, which is why their damages can be quickly covered after an accident. That brings me to the end of my presentation. I think, as I understood, I can answer the questions at the end of the panel. But if you have more questions afterwards, of course, you can always you're welcome to contact me by email. Thank you.
Dear Lawrence, thank you so much. Really appreciate that you prepared a presentation. It was indeed interesting. I think that is something we can discuss for hours. And I'm already seeing that there are a few questions here in the Q&A. But before starting with the questions from our people in the audience, I think it would be of interest to understand a little bit what the Swiss ordinance is, especially in compared to other countries. If you could give a high overview a little bit, what's the difference, for example, to the one in Germany or to other ones?
I must admit, I'm not very familiar with the other legislation from other nations. Even we have consulted the German and also the French legislation on this topic, but I'm not no expert. I think what distinguishes our approach is the attempt to keep the legislation in flow. As mentioned in the presentation, we are already considering the first revisions. The idea behind this is that the regulation cannot be perfect in the end, since no one has experience with the legislation on this subject, since technology possibilities are also changing. We as a legislator must act flexibly. Another approach that distinguishes our ordinance is it's a rather liberal approach in the sense that we did not want to regulate anything that is not necessary. I must add this is a general approach in all of the Swiss legislation. But an example from our audience is even though the keeper plays a significant role, he has been given a lot of freedom so that he can design how his driverless vehicles can operate safely. This way, we are not unnecessarily hindering technical innovation. Ultimately, we can hardly judge how the person responsible for the use of driverless vehicles can guarantee that they will operate safely. But however, this approach also carries a risk. Public acceptance can suffer if the impression arises that the vehicle keepers have hardly any regulations and they are not being monitored. So that's a little bit of backside.
What I think and what I read out of the at least the latest draft from the ordinance is, and I think that is clearly of interest for at least a lot of international players, knowing that with a type approval or receiving type approved vehicles is definitely something we have to wait until 2026, 2027. Is that we have an exemption clause in the ordinance that says type approved vehicles are actually not necessary for us. Is that correct? Knowing that, of course, you have the same safety limits when it comes to these certain vehicles.
Yes, as I mentioned in the presentation, it is a possibility that the Federal Road Office allows that there is no need for the type approval. It is necessary that the security is the same, and that all the other conditions are generally met, as you said. And yes, I think it's a little bit the idea that before there are vehicles with a type approval, that it's possible to have a single vehicles that were already tested in a pilot, that they can be used in a regular way. Yes.
Mhm.
But as I also mentioned, we don't have experience with this provision. We also have to look how will it work in practice.
Okay. And next question on my side, and then I will jump also to the questions from the people in the audience. Currently, it's the case that the canton has to approve the service according to the new ordinance. It's in regards to, let's say, we have a pilot project. Normally, it's the federal approving the different documents, and of course, the service according to the ordinance. Basically, it's the cantons. So the federal moves away a little bit from having a nationally unified strategy to more a localized approach. What's the reason behind this? Why on a state level? Why can it be in the end the federal themselves approving a service in that regard?
Well, to start, I think a localized, a decentralized approach is just part of the Swiss DNA. If it's possible to do something by the cantons, normally the competence is given to the cantons and it's not done on a federal level. I think we also need both. I think we have on a national also unitized approach, for example, with the technical regulations. But yes, the decentralized approach is more important than with the pilots. And the problem would also be if we had if we wanted to, I'm sorry, if we would wanted to make the more unified approach with this regulation, it would have to be more restrictive because there would be a lot of contents that would not agree the draft, and that's why we had to give some competence to the cantons so that those cantons that are willing to allow automated driving, that they can do it, and those that are not ready yet, they don't have to, or at least they have a little bit more time. And that way, that leads also to another advantage, that the automated driving will spread where the public acceptance is already there. And if the public acceptance is not big enough, it won't overwhelm the public. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you so much. Really interesting. Perhaps before going to the questions from the audience, let's also involve our panelists, as you guys are, of course, the experts. So, Jérôme Beukler from TPG, what's your opinion on the new ordinance? How do you actually see it? Do you think we are on the right track here? Do you also see any gaps, perhaps, in regards to this ordinance? You're on mute.
Sorry,
yeah,
excuse me. From our side, as TPG, as a public transport operator, it is extremely important that this ordinance is put in place. And why? Because it describes correctly that as a public transport operator, we know exactly where we want to drive and where we want to stop, because we have either fixed bus lines or either we have an area which is a known area where we want to deploy our vehicles. And either those are bus-driven vehicles or automated vehicles. So for us, it's important that this ordinance is completely aligned with what public transport operators need also. We saw the last 7 years that all our projects were put together in the framework as a pilot project, which means that every project has to be followed by the federal. A large application file had to be put together and so on. And we hope that it will be easier for us to deploy automated vehicles within the framework of the ordinance. So yes, I think this is a very good step forwards in automated mobility in Switzerland.
Just quickly staying with this point, because the current DNA of public transport is, let's be honest, the timetable. No matter where you look, of course, I think in future politicians, they will no longer order an expensive timetable, but more quality of accessibility.
Yes.
So what does it mean for you being part of a public transport operator, having one of the leading projects in Europe? How do you see the future mobility system?
It's very easy. If you look at the canton of Geneva, which is quite a small canton, then in the inner city, a lot of people don't own a car anymore because public transport is very, very good. But in less denser zones, rural zones, people have not always very good access to public transport. In order to change this, one of the solutions is to have a DRT system, so dynamic transport, on-demand transport, minibuses which drive not on fixed lines, not on fixed timetables, but can organize public transport. And now this works very well. We already have this in place, and we could do this until almost 70%, 74% of the surface of the canton of Geneva, if we wish to do so. But then the next question is, this is economically not viable to do this with buses, with a large fleet of minibuses with drivers inside, especially if you want to drive, yes, almost 22 hours a day, 7 days a week. So then the logic next step is to automate this system with automated minibuses. So for us, it's extremely important to have this technology, in fact, to organize that our services, our public transport service, are much better than they are today.
Okay, thank you so much. Perhaps coming to you, Mr. Gessner, knowing that it's at least one of the first projects for you in Europe, using your vehicles here in Switzerland. Can you perhaps tell us a little bit about your European strategy, how you would like to go forward? Why is it Switzerland for you that you choose for one of your first projects? If you could elaborate a little bit on your strategy for Europe, please.
Yeah. So it's not only us. We choose Switzerland, I think, from both sides. So for us, it's attractive Switzerland for 3 reasons. And the first one is about the less political tension, so the neutrality of in the tradition of in Switzerland, which of course is well known. The current global political situation has a big impact on economic activities. Yeah. And this is the reason one. The second one is the open-minded innovation spirit, not across the organization, public transportation organization. We have the representative now with TPG. We have also a very agile and flexible, very fast responding authority like Astra is also today in the panel. And we have also, which is not represented today, also government. Yeah, for the first project, I think we work very closely with the canton. Yeah, is very strong support from the canton. Without that one, that support would not be possible. And the third reason I think is nevertheless the important is all the financial, right? So is very in good financial status, and the state is important, is fundamental to carry on projects. I think this is the very important for the innovation for the first project for the commercial. Yeah.
Something I would like to add on is indeed what you just said there, the collaboration with the federal offices here in Switzerland. That is indeed a major advantage for all of us, not just with the federal offices, but of course also the cantons, where it's honestly speaking really easy to collaborate in trying out new ideas, new things, and of course new technologies such as autonomous vehicles. Nevertheless, knowing that at some point, of course, it has to be a business case. We all need to earn money with that, right? How do you see the business model behind using these, especially as Jeroen from TPG said it, DRT systems? You have to scale at some point, right? With 10, 20, 30 vehicles, It's a nice project in the beginning, but at some point you have to scale. So how do you see the business model, especially for us here in Switzerland, being a smaller country?
Yeah. So I think the important thing is the business model. Yeah, you're absolutely right. At the end of the day, we need to have a positive cash flow at the end of the day on the balance. But innovation need time to get that point. Today we are not at that point. I think we are all agree with that one. But we need players already to start to the first step of the commercialization. Also working with the authority to get this law framework, regulatory framework, more suitable for the commercial scalability later on. Also to get the acceptance for the citizens, for the public transport, public mobility. How to say, the people who need this public mobility get used to this technology. I think this is more important before we are talking about rush into the commercialization. I think we are still a little bit away from the real revenue generating. And today is really to head ecosystem. We can talk into that later on. I think a technology alone will not make a successful business model for the L4 technology. We need all the parties, not only the cutting edge artificial intelligence technology, but also people doing the remote operation, people also doing the maintenance, also technical supervisor, also the owners, the keepers of the vehicle, also insurance, local traffic regulation, and everything. We need everybody get used to our this new model of the technology and integrate that to the existing mobility infrastructure. Yeah, make added value to the citizens. I think this we are more focused. We are in essence we are far from the positive case business model. But we need to do this step we are doing now.
You just said it, innovation takes time. Coming to you, Christian, from Holo, you have lots of experience in this field, especially, of course, with your project in Oslo, not just on of course, transporting people, but also goods. That is something where Holo is quite good at. Where do you see the biggest challenges and thus also the greatest potential for improvement using these vehicles, especially when it comes to the collaboration between, for example, a mobility service provider, the vendor itself, and of course other parties in that project? How would you see this?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Martin, because that's a generally evolving headline, right? Because we are learning every day as we push the boundaries for the technology in the implementation, but also in the collaboration with all the partners in the ecosystem that is necessary to make it work. And I think we can probably all agree that there's a vision that these technologies will be able to bring the car park down, be able to get rid of some of the cars so that we don't have to own cars. We can share them more. We can ride pool. We can make the streets useful for a little less than parking cars and a little bit more pleasure and so on, right? But in getting to that process, I think it's also important to understand that the technology will not be proven overnight. We have to push boundaries and learn from it every day. And I think the collaboration between the vehicle provider, the AD provider, the local operator, the keepers of the vehicle, so to say, and the local legislation and the framework, that's where you learn. And I think you got to be a little persistent because you probably won't meet perfect success in 3 months. You got to be persistent in pushing and shaping the results over time. And if you do that, at the same time as keeping a data-driven approach so you can document what you do, I think that you will be able to showcase daily progress, which is what we need to kind of slowly onboard everyone in the big ecosystem.
So being new to this doesn't matter if I'm a public transport operator or whatever kind of mobility provider. What should be my first steps basically in that regard, due to the fact that everything is still, of course, complicated? As Young said, innovation takes time. What should be the first steps basically to not just showcase the public that it's really working, but also not making any mistakes that in the end can become quite costly for us. How do you see this?
I think Holo is 8 years of deployment and implementation of several technology generations. We have made progress, we have made errors, we've made mistakes, but we have most importantly learned a lot. And I think what we have learned is every AD provider out there is a little bit different. They have different strengths, they have focused on different software solutions and so on. And I think it always starts with understanding where do you want to operate autonomous vehicles? What is the, let's say, attributes of the roads in the area you want to operate, and then understand them. I think we have seen in previous pilots that we have put technology on the wrong roads, and that will of course lead to failure. So it's about understanding exactly what it is you are looking for. What should the AD solution be able to handle to accompany you and the project with success in the right planned phases? So I think one, understand where you want to drive, and then find out who out there is the best suitable AD provider for that specific use case. 2, start planning it and be realistic. Plan it in phases where you allow yourself for success, and make sure that you document ongoingly how you get this, let's say, planned and how you execute the different milestones, because being transparent and communicating how the project is evolving, that's how you get perception and you get people to see that this can actually be a viable solution for your neighboring area if you live in an area where you are testing these technologies.
Perhaps a question for you, Young. And I think you understood, we of course all would love to scale. In the end, 20 vehicles, 50 vehicles are of course not enough, also not for the end customer basically to have a service that makes sense. What do you think? How should we balance the development of AVs in regards to scaling the service, but also understanding what Christian just mentioned, the need for local testing, adaptation, and validation. How should we balance this, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think for the type approval or for scaling, I think it's essential to get a big industrial partner for the industrialization. For the small series, it's not interesting for it doesn't work for economically. But since we get a certain amount of vehicles, I think it's getting this industrialization. Yeah, it's not a retrofitting on the existing base vehicle, but really from the factory. There we have the industrialized quality standard processes and very mature. I think this is I think this will be essential for this. Yeah, of course we can discuss which number is about 1,000 or is about several hundred. I think this is something we can discuss, but I think that's the way we need to go. Yeah.
Coming to you, Jaren, you being, of course, part of a public transport operator, where do you see currently the gaps also on a technological aspect, of course, that need to be filled in before we can really have commercial viable deployments here in Switzerland? What could be the next approach in that regard?
Well, it's all a chicken and egg problem, and not only in Switzerland, but in all Europe. Because it's like this. In one side, there are the public transport operators like TPG, who see the benefit of having or deploying automated vehicles within their system. But then there are a lot of questions. First of all, do you already have any experience in working with AVs? Well, most public transport operators don't. Then how much money do you need to put on the table to start with? Yeah, and what we saw so the last 5, 6, 7 years is that there are a lot of operators who start testing automated vehicles. They have one vehicle which they test then for 3 months on a fixed bus line. This is not the way to go, in my opinion. The way to go is that there are some specific public transport operators who already have a lot of experience with these kind of systems, vehicles, and so on, which need to deploy a larger fleet. And because the other transport operators, they are just looking if it's economically viable to have such a system. So this is the thing we have to do. Now, if we look at the provider, so the vehicle and ADS provider, yes, they don't have a type-approved vehicle today. But for the small scale, I am thinking about 15 vehicles in my current project. Maybe within 3 or 4 years, I think about doubling or tripling this amount of vehicles. This is not 1,000 vehicles. I'm also not expecting to need 1,000 vehicles. Maybe with 100 vehicles, that's enough within the canton. Yes, to do all the rural areas with minibuses. So then the question for a company like WeRide is, are we going to type approve already a vehicle? So we need to make sure that for projects like my project in Geneva, that a non-type approved vehicle may also be authorized to drive here. Yeah. And so that's for me the gap. You either need to have to place an order of a very large amount of vehicles, and then a company can maybe type approve the vehicle, or we need to do without type approved vehicles. That's currently what is happening for me.
Okay, Lawrence, going ahead with you a little bit. I think you heard that all of us, we would love to scale, and nevertheless, we are still a little bit kept within this framework of doing pilot projects. And of course, we would like to go ahead to do regular services in regards to the new ordinance. So how do you think this transition between doing a pilot and going to this new ordinance project, how should this happen in your opinion?
Well, I think it will be very important that we have a lot of exchange with the companies that make these trials to learn how with the struggles they have, not only technical but also with the administration. And I think we already talked about the exception clause. Maybe it will be possible at some point to have a pilot to be transferred into a regular use. But of course, it will be difficult to scale with this exception clause because it's primarily designed for single vehicles, not for a whole series. So I think we will not be able to go to avoid the type approval at some point. And yes, as Switzerland, the market of Switzerland is just too small. It will probably still be very important what's happening in the EU.
Okay, thank you so much. 2 more questions for you, Lawrence, before we then head to the Q&A part from the audience. First question, I'm not sure if I've seen it on your slides, but is an English version of the ordinance available, or do you plan to make it available?
We are right now, it is a translation, it's made in English, but it will not be an official version, of course. It's only the German and the French and the Italian version are official versions. And thus, I'm not sure yet where the translation will be published at this point, but there will be one available soon.
Okay, thank you so much. Another question, I think that is of importance because that is something I'm receiving so often lately. Remote operations in regards to doing teleoperations. So really, which I think is part of the ordinance, but perhaps you can further elaborate on this, Lawrence, please.
Yes, I think the concept of the remote operator, it's heavily influenced by the EU regulation. The idea is that the operators do not control the vehicle, but that if the vehicle is in a situation where it can't handle the traffic anymore, that the operator gives them orders how to proceed. And we don't have a lot of regulation in the ordinance on this topic. There needs to be an operator. That's the main point. There are the main duties are mentioned, but as I think I already mentioned it in the presentation, that the duties will be defined by the manufacturer, essentially, and the safe use of the operators must be guaranteed by the keeper of the vehicle. They have to prove during the approval to the canton during the approval process that they use the operators in a safe way, that the operators, they have the right workspace and the right I'm sorry, I don't remember the word. But yes, essentially we don't regulate a lot in the ordinance. It's up to the keepers.
But that is more about
and
doing supervision, right?
Yes.
Less in regards to really steer the vehicle, so remote controlling it, or I think I heard the term teledriving. Is that anyhow part of the ordinance? There are a few companies who are doing this. So really remote controlling, as you know.
Okay, remote control. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, a remote control from a large distance won't probably not be possible. We have this possibility if the vehicle is in a risk minimized state. It is possible to remote control it from outside, but at the moment we think it's only possible from a distance to 10 meters, not from a big distance. So yes, and we think that the remote control from like a office, there are still too many problems that are not resolved for a regular use. It's something we can do in a pilot to make experiences, but it's not ready to use in a regular vehicle. Yes.
Perhaps staying with that topic, because it's another question in the chat. Can you please detail the regulation in place or planned in Swiss regarding the remote operations? So what does a remote operator in the end actually have to do? For example, does he need a driver license? What are his responsibilities? How many vehicles can he manage? What is stated here in the ordinance, Lawrence?
Yes, there are some personal conditions. You mentioned the driver license. You need to have a driver license for the vehicle, for the type of vehicle he supervises. He shouldn't drink alcohol during the work. This is also mentioned in the ordinance. But the duties, there are some duties that are mentioned. For example, that he has to react to information from the vehicle that he has. If there are passengers in the vehicle that want to contact him, that he needs to react to this. But it's really rather a broad approach. We don't have. It's rather superficial, and yes, but I think that those are the main points that are regulated today.
Okay. Perhaps next question for you, Young. How many vehicles will be needed from the EU that we will go for the type approval?
I think I cannot provide you now the exact number, so we need to also discuss that with our industrialization partner, the manufacturing partner. But it also depends on the type of the vehicle. We have different L4 vehicles. We have a rubber bus. We have also the vans. We have also 7 seats, 5 seats, and different type of vehicles. So we will choose the one with the most potential volume and go with that one. I think as a number, we definitely not need 10-20,000, like we are doing with the passenger cars industry, to get the supply chain, also the parts pricing and so on. But we definitely need a small, a big hundreds until 1,000, and also leverage our global demands. I think this would be a range where we can talking about the type approval for 50, 60, everything below hundreds. I think it's not economically meaningful.
Okay, thank you. Next question, and I'm not sure who can answer this, but do you think the EU and ECE are keeping up with the developments, or are we falling behind the US and China, and Switzerland is now the only country outside China to allow Chinese operators? Who would like to enter this?
Maybe firstly to your last question.
One. I don't mind.
Yeah. Maybe just to your second part of the question, not the UNCE, but of the countries. I think Switzerland is not the first one or the only one. WeRide is operating, so we are already operating in Singapore, Japan, United Arab Emirates, US as well. So I think we have already successfully launched in France, in French Open. I think these are several countries, and I think Switzerland is not the only one.
And perhaps another question that a few of you can actually answer. Is there anything mentioned regarding vehicle-to-X standards regulations, especially regarding vehicle-to-infrastructure communication, or better to ask, Holo using it, WeRide using that? Perhaps, Young, you would go ahead and start, and then I can ask you.
Yeah, so our AV technology is not heavily reliant on the infrastructure, but the minimum we need is at least 40 5G wireless connectivities. I think this we need to the infrastructure. There's no other hard dependencies on the infrastructure.
Christian, how do you see it in Oslo currently, for example?
It's very similar. So it's not because we need to alter or change the road infrastructure in any way to make it work. Of course, we do see that when you go into residential areas, you have very narrow roads. So it's more or less coming down to being able to handle these very complex and diverse driving scenarios where you have to, let's say, give each other space on a very narrow road to be able to overtake each other. But other than that, we rely, of course, on a good connectivity so that you can, let's say, the vehicle can stay connected.
Okay, thank you. Because Nicolas is joining again, it seems like we are close to the end, unfortunately. I have at least a million other questions for you guys, but last question on this, which I think is quite an interesting one for you also, Lawrence. What's the regulation regarding the data collection for these vehicles? I think there's also an article, right, in the ordinance.
I'm sorry, I was just not understanding the question.
What's the regulation regarding the data collection?
Yes. There are some provisions on data provisions, but it's basically on the use of the data by the administration when they are checking for example, the application for a route. But the data collection by the producer or by the keeper, it's not regulated in the ordinance, as I know. But I must admit, this is a technical question I'm not very familiar with.
No worries. We will see it, as said, hopefully soon in the English translated version. And nevertheless, you highlighted also that people can contact you, of course, which I really appreciate. So I think we are at the end, Nicola, correct? Or can we go ahead a few more minutes?
I would love to let you do that, but I think we're at the very end now, yes.
Wonderful. So on my side, thank you all for joining today. I think it was really interesting. Thank you to the panelists. As I said, really appreciate that you took the time to answer the questions. And of course, we really appreciate having WeRide here in Switzerland, together with Holo as well, of course, and hopefully having more projects soon here in Switzerland at some point.
Yes, thank you so much, Martin, as well, for moderating this conversation. I think you could have all gone for probably another hour, but yeah, we do have to let people go. Thank you again, Jerry-On Yong, Christian, Laurence, for such an interesting conversation. And yeah, thank you for joining our audience. The recording will be uploaded in a couple of days. If you have more questions, I'm sure you can find our amazing panelists somewhere online. But thank you again for attending. Wishing you a great afternoon and have a good week ahead as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.